Politicons Book 2, written by Oliver Arnold and narrated by Adam 11 Labs. Chapter 8. Jack Manney had never not lived in a penthouse. Sure, some of his past residences may have had a limited ocean view or been less marbled than others, 8-foot ceilings versus 12. But now, Manney cowered on the forest floor, with an arrangement of sticks around him hardly distinguishable as shelter. Manney's head lay on the ground, his mouth frozen open. Every once in a while, an insect found its way into the Polly's maw, which then snapped shut and chomped the animal, only to return to its open state moments later. Manney stared blankly at the pile of sticks that represented his day's achievement. Was it the beginnings of his shelter or an unlit campfire? Even Manney couldn't tell. A terrifying screech broke from the jungle, but the Polly paid it no heed. He had lost all fear of predators. The bugs alone would eat him alive. His limbs were bloated with marks both red and white. His face looked much like a fusion of crushed raspberries and overcooked fish. Night fell. This would mark a shift change. Until now, diurnal mosquitoes, bullet butterflies, and ear-borrowing spiders had reigned. Soon, time came for the more haunting nocturnal species of ox spiders and the nut-ripper monkeys. Manney was exposed and needed a solution. He searched his mind for knowledge of nature. How many power outlets did a tree come with? After turning many a palm frond in search of switches, the Polly gave up. Perhaps there were other ways to emit light and warmth. How did this wilderness house so many mosquitoes but not a single firefly? Running out of ideas fast, Manney returned to the cache and scrutinized, and indeed, he found a small cardboard box with a miniature drawer inside. The drawer was filled with little sticks, the likes of which Manney had never seen. A flame embellished the box, ergo these things were somehow connected to fire. Great pride overcame the Polly. He hadn't achieved a string of coherent thought this long in years. But how did the sticks function? Manney noticed that they featured thickened, bubbly ends that were colored differently. This had to be a button. Manney pushed the match heads, but no fire appeared. Perhaps these things were levers to activate the fire, but where to insert them? Manney searched the box for an opening, but found none. By the GM. How was one to understand this? Manney had seen many fires in his days. There was the nuclear blaze of his walk-in fireplace, the flaming mojitos, and the flame on his steak tartare. But how exactly those had been set off, he did not know. Manney could not, by the life of him, and this situation was about just that, remember ever having initiated a fire by means other than a button. Manney grew angry and rubbed the useless sticks across the box like an insolent child. A match suddenly lit. Manney was stunned. That had been the missing ingredient. Anger! Manney began to rip out some of his fuzzy, pubescent hair and used it as tinder. It lit. Now warm, bug-free, and without fear of the beasts around, Manney let the hypnotic flames dance in front of him while the dark ghost of night dragged across the jungle. Manney's eyes fluttered. The dancing blades shaped into figures, persons from Manney's past. There was his father chastising him, his sister stealing his stuff, his mother stuffing ballot boxes, and his first meeting the GM. Feeling close to death, a strange calm overcame Manney. He reflected upon his past and himself, Manney the man, Manney the persona, the larger-than-life, the unmatched, the undefeated, a mega-politician worth millions, tax-free plus franchises, and now a failure at nearly everything he'd attempted on the island. Food, water, and suicide, but not fire. A life's worth was determined by how many people felt loss after one's death. He tried to think of anyone who'd suffer after his demise. Sure, they'd have a Politicons special, lackeys would be ordered to moan, memorials would be erected, but shortly after the mandatory celebrations, he'd enter oblivion just like a piss-poor prole rotting on the shit levels. What were his true talents? Who was this man, Jack Manney, the senator on the hit show Politicons? Manney, the manimal, searched deep within and uncovered a liar, a thief, and a traitor. He liked what he found, but where had these traits come from? His mind wandered to his late mother, a truly special woman. She could destroy 1,000 lives only to return home and bake wonderful pies. His mother would listen to hours of frantic confessions at home while tugging Manney and his sister to sleep. With a warm smile, Manney remembered his mother's favorite pastime. She'd spend long nights sewing lampshades from the blood-stained ballots of the polling prisons she had been in charge of. Starting her career as a simple warden, his mother quickly rose through the party ranks after her creative implementation of the voting prison system. In her facilities, prisoners were allowed to cast ballots for a chance of improving their situation based on their voting choices. His mother would never allow political discourse at the dinner table, but always prayer. Manney wasn't sure if the GM approved of a god other than the GM himself. Not a believer, Manney had the GM, and that was enough of an overlord. Surely, though, the GM would not mind the worship of another, greater master, as long as it didn't actually exist. And evidently the other god didn't do much of anything, or at least didn't talk about it as often as the GM did. Manney's mind veered to his father. Old Man Manney had been a military general and often left for weeks on end to fight wars. When Manney Sr. returned, he treasured nothing more than spending time with his loved ones, the vast collection of medals he kept in his study. When it was time to leave again, Manney's father would always take a select few of his darlings to battle. He made it an art to decorate himself with the honors most suitable for the conflict at hand: Suppressor of Unwanted Freedom, the Meritorious Blaster Medal, or Distinguished Destroyer of Nerds, that he'd received for the 2112 IT uprising. Naturally, Manney had always been tempted to break the strict rules regarding these honors while his father was gone. Often, after the general left, Manney made his way into his old man's study and marveled at the treasure. Yet just viewing them soon became inadequate, and little Manney began taking the honors out of their display cases to try them on. It came as it had to. Manney dropped his father's favorite medal, dinging it, and just then, their maid entered the room. The damn wench instantly caught on to the situation, and her face froze with terror. Manney, though, to his own surprise, remained calm. The maid began to wave her arms. "I see nothing," the wench stammered, backing out and hitting the doorframe. He remembered her red eyes, the runny makeup, her sobbing and her pleading. Why on earth a woman like that would wear makeup, Manney still could not comprehend. "Junana, come back here!" 10-year-old Manney ordered her sharply. The woman froze, avoiding Manney's gaze. As dim as the wench was, she was keenly aware of the trouble she had stumbled into. Manney, stunning even himself, directed the now quietly praying woman to pick up the medal and polish it. After an eternity, she was finally done. Manney inspected the result. The dent remained visible. "He won't notice," little Manney proclaimed. But the woman's trembling only grew, and the mother of 5 begged and pleaded. After unending apologies and many reassurances, he released her. Then, later that night, he went straight to his father to report the clumsy cow. She was fired, and Manney never saw her again. Surely she and her spawn had perished. Reflecting on the incident now, Manney realized that it wasn't the woman's misery, tears, or his power over her life that had made this such a pivotal moment, but Manney's ability to spin his mistake into someone else's and deflect blame. What pleasure, what satisfaction! Henceforth, Manney made it a habit to break the rules. To his regret, no further mishaps transpired, and the habitual play became dull. The stakes needed raising. Manney now began stealing honors and keeping them, even past his father's return. Over time, his lifting bouts grew bolder, until that one day. Manney emerged from his fantasy. He looked around in a daze. Yes, he was back in the jungle. If only he could live in his mind forever. His leg itched intolerably. Among all the bites and stings, there was one blank spot that bothered him most. Manney scrutinized it. A single, long, black hair grew out of it. Too long, too thick, and too black even for him. Manney ripped it out, tossed wood on the fire, and returned his attention to the miraculous flames, as the strongest of the past's echoes was yet to come. The last time Manney had seen his father, and the first time he spoke to the GM. Manney gazed back into the flames as they recalled the events for him. "You cannot have it, Jackfrey," his father said, referring to the medal Manney had claimed. His son had grown bolder over the years, not simply stealing his father's honors anymore, but claiming them as his own, unafraid of confrontation. "But I must have it," little Manney said. "Look," old Manney said consolingly, "I'll cut you a deal. When I get the special edition medal for the Arbor later this month, you can have it. That'll give you something to look forward to." "No," said little Manney. "You cannot always get your way." Anger rose in little Manney. "But I will," he shouted. Manney remembered distinctly his father's being bemused by little Jack's ferocity, but the medal remained in old Manney's possession. Later that same night, little Jackfrey woke. It was unclear what had stirred him, and he was about to return to sleep when a crackle sounded from his bedside media player. He felt a presence.
"A caring father would have granted your wish,"
a voice suddenly said. Manney pulled the blanket as far over himself as possible. Someone was in the room. It took the boy a few moments to realize that the voice had originated from a speaker, yet the system had never played anything but music. It had been set up by his parents that way. No news or communications were allowed.
"I will get you all the honors you deserve,"
the sonorous voice claimed, sounding calm and reasonable. Here was a stern adult, but also a friendly advisor, like an uncle. Uncle. Manney realized that he could not tell whether the voice came from a man or a woman. He felt the voice's attention on him and finally asked, "Who are you?" To little Manney's great shock, the voice replied,
"It matters not. Just know that I am here to help."
"Help me how?"
"I witnessed your dealing with that woman. It takes someone special to do that."
"What do you want from me?"
"Do you know about deals, Jackfrey?"
Naturally, Manney knew deals. He'd been running school hustles since first grade. Of course he wanted to strike a deal. When Manney didn't immediately reply, the voice continued,
"Your father has disrespected you."
Manney thought about this. The voice spoke.
"You merely wished to follow in your father's footsteps. Why does he not cherish it?"
Manney didn't have an answer. They left the question open.
"Tomorrow, you will inform me what your father and his friends discuss at your house,"
the voice then said. Now this Manney knew he shouldn't relay. "Why don't you do it yourself?" he asked the voice. "You can hear me just fine."
"I'm not all hearing and all seeing,"
the voice replied.
"My friends help me."
"Friends? Are those friends in here?" Manney asked with intrigue.
"Yes."
This scared little Manney, but the voice clarified.
"You are here. I will give you a gift, proof of my trust."
When Manney peeked from under his blanket, he saw the special edition medal his father had sought, right there on the nightstand. Now he, Jackfrey, had it. Honors he didn't deserve but received. He'd carry the thing all around school, but there was also a bargain to keep. The following day, Manney snuck up on the closed doors of his father's meeting room. He could hear voices from inside. "Do we have privacy?" an imposing person asked. "Yes," his father responded. "The room's shielded." Manney couldn't recall their conversation. They were them plotting against, or for, someone or something. At the time, Manney understood and cared about nothing. He simply wrote down the names, and the following night forwarded them to the voice. The voice was pleased, and from then on, little Manney reported his father's written correspondence, phone calls, and personal conversations every night. After no time at all, snitching had become second nature for him. One day, the peace enforcement came to their house and took Manney's father. Jackfrey should never see him again. If his father ever found out who'd betrayed him, he'd be so proud. Now all the medals belonged to little Jack, him, alone. After these events, Manney didn't hear the voice again for the longest time, not until an unbearable itch on his arm woke Manney from his trance. Upon inspection, his limb bore no redness. No bug bite or worm had burrowed into it, but again, a long and straight hair shot from the bothersome location. Manney ripped it out, tossed a few branches on the fire, cuddled up to the tiger next to him, and continued his mind's narration. It was good to go over your life's crucial events, a kind of self-assessment foreign to Manney. This time, the flames attracted memories of young Jackfrey, just leaving for university. His mother, kissing him goodbye, wouldn't miss him much. Manney had doubts whether his parents would leave him anything. He could not and would not rely on that assumption, and for better or worse, he had to take care of his own destiny. While Manney's boredom had nurtured the seed of rebellion, he had always been deeply lazy, and thus decided to fit society's mold neatly. A lack of open housing forced Manney to take on shared college accommodations. This was both new and uncomfortable for the privileged boy. He'd never shared anything with anyone, never been invited to sleepovers, or had a cozy weekend snuggle with his parents. At dinners during Manney's childhood, each family member would use their own table. One afternoon, he and his roommate sat around semi-studying while the telly ran. It had only been a few days since their move-in, and they hadn't much connected. "You into torturing small animals?" his roommate had asked. "No," Manney replied, and then surprised himself when his frank answer shot out. "Stealing stuff. But you're rich." "Yeah." His roommate nodded and said, "I'm an occult shaman, a new form of shamanism that I invented." "You know the occult?" his roommate said. "No," Manney said. "Want to learn about it? Join my seance tonight?" "Yeah, okay," Manney replied with disinterest just to end the conversation. His roommate, to Manney's chagrin, remembered their engagement that evening and had a stupid circle of lights and a pentagram drawn on the floor. As this happened in their shared dormitory, Manney had no way out, and thus he sat down among pentagrams, chalices, and candles. "So," Manney asked with a yawn, "whom are we summoning here?" "The mysterious GM," his roommate exclaimed. "What's a GM?" "Only the most powerful being on Earth," his roommate replied before he began to spasm and chant. "Nothing happens without its knowledge, without its consent. It's the very fiber of society." "Pfft," Manney blew air dismissively. "That doesn't exist, and if it did, you wouldn't know about it. The GM controls all but from the shadows. Some say he's the Dark Lord himself." "How come I've never heard of him? Is it even a man?" "Of course it is. You haven't because he's controlling everything covertly, has for centuries. No one's that old." "The GM is," his roommate began to murmur in awe. "Oh, great Shadow Lord, reveal yourself." "So is this GM our creator?" Manney asked. "Ha!" said his roommate, lighting a small flame. "More like the destructor." He sprinkled powder into the fire. Smoke emerged. "Best not to ask too many questions." He fell into a trance that looked like he'd dozed off. After an awkward pause, he woke and said, "That's it." Manney didn't understand. "What's it?" "Nothing happened," Manney said, hopeful that this declared the end. "Does anything ever happen?" he asked. "Never," said his roommate conspiratorially. "But I felt a chill." Just then, a sonorous voice broke from all the speakers in the room.
"Jack Free."
"Who is this?" Manney's roommate said, his voice breaking, his eyes darting about.
"Out now."
The voice said, thundering, without addressing anyone in particular. Manney's roommate nodded frantically, shot up, his regalia catching on the deer antlers he had attached to his chair. But, naked, he still rushed out.
"It has been a long time, Jack Free."
The voice now said much more calmly.
"I've been watching you, and I am pleased with your progress. Would you be interested in another deal?"
Manney wasn't sure if he was, so he remained silent.
"Perhaps the acceleration of your studies?"
"What do you want in return?" Manney mumbled.
"You are interested. Good. I shall be in touch."
And with that, the oracular voice quieted. Manney had recognized it instantly. It carried the same inflection as his mysterious benefactor of his youth. Oddly, though, its intonation had remained unchanged, even after all those years. Back then, it had kept its word, although Manney hadn't heard from it since. A few days later, Manney happily buzzed about his dorm solo as his roommate had never returned, with lots of entertainment and little study. After only weeks, he'd failed all tests and quizzes, an impossible achievement. Suddenly, a girl strode recklessly past his open dorm door. Manney immediately engaged and jumped out into the hallway. Hey, want to set the Jack free?" he said, calling after her. The girl ignored him as best as she could, trying to squeeze past him. Abruptly, Manney's face changed from flagrant to pained. A voice had blasted from his earbuds.
"Jack Free."
"What?" Manney asked into the room. "Nothing," the girl said.
"I require your assistance,"
said the voice. Manney knew who this was. There was no mistaking the voice. "Yes, I shall be your humble servant," Manney said to his own surprise. The girl stopped. "That's a fine proposal," she said, walking up to Manney. "But you're so repulsive. That's a no, regardless." Manney missed the insult. His full attention was on the voice.
Open your dorm's left cabinet. Find the yellow cup at the back of the shelf. Go to the student council meeting room and replace the cup there with yours.
The cup is in my room? Manney asked cautiously, not to anger the voice.
Yes.
I don't own a yellow cup.
You do not.
How did it get there? When the GM didn't reply, Manney finally shouted, "Yes, great master!" and felt instant regret for his childish obedience. The voice produced a noise resembling a chuckle and said,
Great master? Is that what you think GM stands for?
Manney shuddered, anticipating a hefty penalty for his disrespect. But then the voice added,
I rather like it.
And quieted. Sometime later, Manney executed the deed. After receiving no feedback from the GM, he went on with his day as he had an exam around noon. Manney hadn't prepared at all, knew he was screwed, but took it anyway as there were always hot chicks in the room. When Manney got stuck on the very first question, the GM's voice suddenly sounded from everywhere.
Jackfrey, you have helped me, and I will help you.
Startled, Manney looked about. The voice had loudly addressed him by name with all these people around, but none showed signs of having heard it. Hell, no one reacted at all, not even the professor. It had somehow only been talking to him. Manney checked his ears for buds. They weren't in.
Feel the underside of your desk,
the voice now said. Manney fumbled under his desk as discreetly as possible.
Find the elongated gap,
it then said. Manney did as asked and sensed an object that had been shoved into the slit between two panels. He began tugging on it as inconspicuously as possible. He felt that they were sheets of paper. But how could he bring them up without arousing suspicion? He didn't trust the students around him. He coughed and pretended to tie his shoes. This immediately brought the professor's attention. Keep your hands up, the man said sternly. Manney nodded, but the professor looked back down at his own papers. A great mistake, as Manney pulled up the sheets in one smooth motion, hiding their rustling among his own movements. Manney couldn't believe his eyes. The sheets were, the test he was taking, completed in his handwriting. He passed with flying colors. From then on, the GM frequently used Manney's services. After ratting out multiple organized student groups and professors as being too smart for their own good, Manney began to understand that his actions caused great harm to some people and greatly benefited others, himself being one of the latter. He flew through college and graduated with honors from Alpha Kappa T. Manney knew nothing. It was astounding. He'd always thought himself a cheater and had expected to somehow half-ass his way through college and life, but his unknowing was something else. He'd put no effort into his studies at all. Instead, he'd spied on people, sabotaged lives, and destroyed institutions with absolutely no idea as to what the end game was. Post-graduation, the GM assigned Manney a career and eventually selected him for a position in politics. Manney's friends and foes alike could never understand how the man made all these grand career steps in such a short time. It was miraculous, sometimes even for Manney himself. He felt invincible, and perhaps he was. But no longer. Had the GM abandoned him, Manney wasn't aware of any missteps. No, it couldn't have been his fault alone. All the other Politicons were here too. Manney woke up. Another insufferable itch tortured him, and he found more hair growing where it didn't belong. This time, an entire strand. Manney didn't feel like ripping it out and singed it angrily. This growth interrupted his thoughts. Manney surprised himself by enjoying his mind's journey by the fire. A critical question arose. Who was this person, Jack Manney? An intriguer, a backstabber, a skirt chaser? Yes. But was there more? These were superficial traits, outlets for what he truly craved. Freedom, liberty. America didn't offer much of it. One could live like the proles. Yes, they were confined to their shitty zone, but down there they enjoyed almost boundless, rule-free liberty. Perhaps this island could bring about that one positive change for him? Why engage with the other side when one could roam free? The world would soon forget him, and Manney could gain true freedom. But no, the GM would always find him. At times, Manney had wondered what would have become of him without the GM, a lying thief or a thieving liar. With these confusing thoughts, Manney nodded off. Manney shot back to reality with a rumbling stomach. Nothing to eat, no weapons to hunt, no shelter. It was unfathomable that he should be left with squat at this stage in life. The exploits, the backstabbings, had his victims suffered for nothing? It was no use lamenting, yet he couldn't wrap his head around this nature thing or the democracy the resistors had been whining on about. In nature, not all animals were equal. The lion was stronger than the flea, although the flea could bother the lion pretty badly. This analogy also applied to the Politicons and the resistors, Manney realized. But what if the polis succeeded on the island, lived together in harmony or whatever, and were allowed to return and govern? There had never been any leadership from the politicians' end. He, Jackfrey Manney, Senator of Themerica, had no idea how the country functioned, and of course no interest in learning it. He wanted to shout at the world, at the resistors, that he was just a puppet, that they should release him, that he was worthless. But then, one shouldn't be hasty, even in precarious situations. What if he consolidated all the polis to put on a big show, a spectacle even grander than Politicons, and fooled the resistors into letting them return? But that was later. Now he had to hunt and gather, gather and hunt. Manney located a berry bush. The fruit smelled good and looked fresh and juicy. Good to eat? How much damage could a tiny berry do? Manney ate one. It tasted like burning. Manney hesitated, but then the craving overcame him, and he hastily devoured dozens before suddenly freezing with his hand in his mouth. Manney's eyeballs began to twitch. They rolled inward, and Manney's forehead and shoulders spasmed as if he were dancing the shoulder shimmy. After a brief pause, the Polly went into a scratching fit, violently rubbing his arms and legs. He dropped to all fours, crawled about frantically, and then ceased to roll onto his back, with his legs and arms writhing like a dying beetle, only to convulse into a fetal pose. Rattled by cramps and jerking his head as if it were filled with spiders, the manimal suddenly stretched wide open, bat-monkey style, tearing the skin on his back and revealing fur. You heard the 8th chapter of Politicons Book 2, written and produced by Oliver Arnold.